you will, go ahead and open your song book to number 649. 649. Brother Ricky is going to lead us in that song. And then after that, Brother Ray, would you lead our prayer for us, please?
We'll sing the first and last verse. Oh, sometimes the shadows are deep, and crossing sunlight to the goal, and sorrow shall often mislead. My sin shall come over the soul, falling to the rock that we find, to the rock that is higher than high. Oh, into the rock that we find, to the rock that is higher than high. Oh, near to the rock that we need, or when some sorrows prevail, or climbing the mountain we see, or walking the shadowy air. Oh, into the rock that we find, to the rock that is higher than high. Oh, into the rock that we find, to the rock that is higher than high.
Shall we pray together? Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for this opportunity that we have of coming together as like-minded souls, brothers and sisters, to study together your word. We're thankful for your word, dear God. May through studies such as this, publicly and private studies, may it continue to be the joy to our heart and our delight. We're thankful for Tony for his ability to interpret your word and to explain it and present it to us in a way that helps us to understand your will towards your creation. Help us, dear God, to ever delight in you, love you, and serve you as we need to in this life. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, if you will, go ahead and open your Bibles to the book of Proverbs. We're going to start our study this morning in chapter 10 and verse 24. As we are going through the book of Proverbs, realize that once you get to chapter 10, Solomon doesn't have it in a narrative form. It's like one verse, sometimes maybe two, or at the most three, that will be related to a theme, but for the most part, they are verse by verse, and they are cyclical. That is, that they will deal with the same principles, the same teachings several times over, and many of them relate to several themes, if you will. Solomon will talk about the importance of working hard to make a living rather than being lazy. He will talk about righteousness versus iniquity. He'll talk about the tongue of the righteous man versus the tongue of the wicked man. He will talk about a person who's willing to listen and to learn and grow versus a person who is unwilling to listen, unwilling to learn, and unwilling to grow. Well, let's take time now to take verse 24, and I put verse 23 up here with it because it goes together with verse 24. He says, "To do evil is like sport to a fool, but a man of understanding has wisdom. The fear of the wicked will come upon him, and the desire of the righteous will be granted." Now, I want you to notice when we get to verse 24 that you have the word fear and you have the word desire. Now, what is maybe before I do that, let's notice the difference between the wicked and the righteous. But the uniqueness is this comes upon him and will be granted. That makes me think of a New Testament verse or verses. Remember Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 and 8? Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Finish it. Whatever man sows, that shall he also reap. He that sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. He that sows to the Spirit will the Spirit reap everlasting life. And he's talking about here the fear of the wicked coming upon him. The desire of the righteous will be granted. In other words, it will come upon him. The difference is what a person is pursuing. If you pursue good, what's going to happen? Good things are going to come back to you. What if you pursue evil? That is going to come back to you as well. Interesting, though, I want to notice the first half of this verse. The fear of the wicked will come upon him. Now, what would be the fear of a wicked man? To be caught, to be found out. What was Haman's desire in the book of Esther? Kill Mordecai. But now, why did he want to kill him? His ultimate desire was to be elevated in power. His greatest fear was to be demoted. See, when Mordecai was given position of prominence, that in itself caused fear to Haman. But Haman's greatest fear was losing his power, but what he prepared to do to Mordecai happened to him. He was hung upon his own gallows. Well, we need to understand here that the idea of the thing that the wicked fears will come upon him. What he is not wanting to happen is what's going to happen to him. And so Solomon is basically talking about what a man pursues. Now let's talk about verses 25 and 26. When the whirlwind passes by, the wicked is no more, but the righteous has an everlasting foundation. As vinegar is to the teeth and smoke is to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. Let's take verse 25 for just a second here. When a whirlwind passes by, the wicked is no more. What does that remind you? What passage of Scripture? Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7. I've already given you 2 hints. Y'all want to phone a friend? Well, you got to stretch a little bit there. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. Foolish man builds his house upon the sand. The rains came, the floods descended, and the winds blew. We got to get rid of the house, The whirlwind passes by, and the wicked is no more. Why are they no more? Do you not see the idea of the whirlwind and the foundation? Foundation, the house is built on the rock. So playing the game with me today. I thought I'd just if you're playing volleyball and you throw the volleyball up and one of your partners comes along and spikes the ball and that makes you, that's what I thought I was going to do. My first 2 or 3 questions is throw it up and I get a spike or 2. So now, may have done that. Okay, let's go to verse 26 because I'd like to cover a little bit more if we could. Vinegar is to the teeth, smoke is to the eyes. Now, to appreciate that, what do you mean when you talk about vinegar to the teeth? Okay, it'll set your teeth on edge. What will it do if you have bad teeth? Pain. Excruciating pain. Vinegar is to the teeth, and he says smoke is to the eyes. Every fall we have our fall festival. It doesn't matter what side of the fire I'm sitting on. I get the smoke that comes off of it. That's the reason why I just soon get away from it. But what does smoke do to your eyes? It irritates them. You know, it makes it hard to see. It makes your eyes want to swell. So is the lazy man to those who send him. Now, I thought what was real interesting here is reading chapter 26 and verse 6. He who sends a message by the hand of a fool cuts off his own feet and drinks violence. You send a message by the hand of a fool. In other words, you've sent somebody like that. And as I was reading a commentary, they was talking about, you know, we read this, and who do we condemn in verse 26? Who do we generally say this is about? The lazy man. But that's not who it's about. Those who send him. If you hire a lazy person, who suffers the most? Okay. Well, let me ask you, maybe be a little more personal. If your kids don't want to pick up their clothes and they don't want to do this and they don't want to do that, who's the one who struggles the most? The parents do. And what he's saying here is, here's a man who sends a lazy man to do a job. Now, I've got a question. Why would he choose a lazy man to do a job? May think he's cheaper. Maybe he doesn't know he's lazy. Maybe he's lazy for not checking out his guy he's sending. And Solomon is trying to say here, you know, you need to think about what you are doing, who you're choosing, who you're sending. And I really tie that with verse 25 where he says, the whirlwind passes by, the wicked is no more, but the righteous has an everlasting foundation. You want to be secure, you need to be careful about who you would send upon a mission or upon a task here, making sure that you're doing the right thing. Take verses 27 and verse 28. The fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. The hope of the righteous will be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. Now, again, let's notice some words here. First of all, the fear of the Lord. Who fears the Lord? What kind of man? Righteous man. What will happen to his days? They'll be long. On the other hand, the wicked, what about his days? Shortened. And I think about the promise that was given to the children of Israel when they were allowed to possess the promised land. And it's interesting the context in which you find it in the New Testament. Remember Ephesians chapter 6, beginning with verse 1? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may live long in the land. You know, you do what's right, and God will establish you. That sounds a lot like the foundation. Back up a couple of verses, doesn't it? So where he's trying to talk about is the fact that if you do what's right, God's going to lengthen your days. He's going to give you enjoyment in the land. And he says, then the hope of the righteous will be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. Now, I think about the hope and the expectation. What is hope? Okay. You know, the way we use hope in our modern day is not exactly the way the Bible uses the word hope. Today, if we say, well, are you going to win this tournament? The Olympics are coming up. Well, will America win this, say, the 200-meter race? They'll say, I hope so. Now, upon what do you base that hope? Wishful thinking. That's not the way the word is used in the Bible. The Bible uses the term hope as confident expectation. It's based upon evidence. It's based upon God. It's based upon what He has said. Romans 8, we are saved in hope. Well, here he talks about the hope of the righteous will be gladness. That's what we're expecting. You do what's right and you have the right to expect gladness and goodness. But the expectation of the wicked will perish. What he's looking for, he will not acquire. What he's wanting to enjoy. Verse 29 and verse 30. The way of the Lord is strength for the upright, but destruction will come to the workers of iniquity. The righteous will never be removed, but the wicked will not inhabit the earth. Now again, we've got some phrases here. The way of the Lord, and who are they? The upright. On the other hand, he talks about the workers of iniquity. And again, he talks about the righteous, and then he talks about the wicked. You can take each of these and see how he's using synonyms or similar phrases to describe them. But he talks about the strength. The way of the Lord is strength for the upright. Makes his way firm. On the other hand, destruction will come to the workers of iniquity. The righteous will never be removed. They're firm. Solomon has been driving a nail one strike at a time. And each one of those strikes is to say, the righteous will be firm like a foundation. The righteous will never be removed. The righteous will stay in the land. The righteous will be benefited. What about the wicked? Their days are going to be shortened. They're going to be destroyed. It's almost like he's driving that nail, and now he's finally driven it all the way in to say that righteous people will enjoy the blessings and the goodness that comes from God, and nothing can change that. Now, let's go to verses 31 and 32. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked is perverse. Well, let's look at our key words again here. That's because if I'm studying, I'm going to come through and I am going to look at the key words here. And if I look at the key words here, what key word keeps coming out? Mouth, lips, tongue. What is that a synonym for? Words. What you say. Does James talk about that in the book of James? Yes, he does. James chapter 1, if a man thinks himself to be religious and does not bridle his tongue, he's deceived himself, and his religion is vain. It's useless. It's worthless. Then you get to chapter 3, and he talks about trying to control the tongue. But now let's talk about the mouth of the righteous man. Now, what does the righteous man do? Bring forth wisdom, verse 32. He knows what's acceptable. How can you know what's acceptable? No difference between right and wrong. God's word. A righteous man has listened. He's learned. He has the fear of the Lord. And so that's what's coming out of him. You remember Matthew chapter 12, when Jesus is talking about what comes out of man? He says, the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. The evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil things. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Well, he's talking about here the righteous, but then he talks about a perverse, and he talks about the mouth of the wicked as what is perverse. Now, what is perverse? Disobedience has to do with crookedness, and it's not straight. it's almost like somebody's getting you off the path. You're deviating. You're going the wrong direction. And he says, the mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut out. God doesn't like it. He doesn't like what's coming out of their mouth. And he says the mouth of the wicked is perverse. That's what they say. I thought it was interesting. The Roman philosopher Seneca, I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he wrote in the 1st century, speech is the index of the mind. Speech is the index of the mind. In other words, whatever we think and say it comes out of our mouth is what has done that. Now, I get to thinking, as I read this whole section here, chapter 17, verse 28, even a fool, when he is counted wise, when he holds his peace, when he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive. What would that tell us? It's chapter 17, verse 28. Okay. I would probably take the flip side of that album. That if you want people to think you're not foolish, don't talk all the time. In other words, make your words few. He said, even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. He doesn't spew forth his foolishness. He doesn't talk all of this wickedness. So I think that's very important as a person makes his choices in life. That's going to lead us to chapter 11. And in chapter 11, there is a little bit of a change focused upon the acts of a person who is righteous. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Now, what do you mean, dishonest scales? They're not even? Okay, there's some intentional deception there. We don't buy our meat like we used to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we used to go to the butcher and we'd say, I need 2 pounds of hamburger meat. And what was the old phrase that you had to be careful of? The butcher's thumb. You know what the butcher's thumb was, don't you? In other words, when he puts the meat up on the scale, he lays his hand right up there with it, and he not only weighs the meat, he's weighing what? Weighing his thumb as well. That's a dishonest scale. But back in biblical times, they didn't have these metered scales. What they did, they had a set of balances. And you would put something on this side, and you put something over here, and if you had, for instance, maybe a 1 pound weight or a 5 pound weight, and when you put it over here, the balance of them would tell you how much. Now, what would happen if you had one set of scales for buying and another for selling? Yep. Okay. Well, they're not going to short themselves. Well, listen to Leviticus 19, verses 35 and 36. You shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Listen to Deuteronomy chapter 15 or 25, verse 13. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and a just weight, a perfect and a just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously, are an abomination to the Lord your God. You see, in God's eyes, it's an abomination to him for somebody to cheat somebody else. Now, let me ask you a question. How would it be possible today for a person to violate this principle? There's a thing I'm thinking of, which is, I'm going to put the volleyball up here now. You're supposed to spike it. I'm thinking about us. Many people are hourly workers. And if you go to a job and you say, I will give you 8 hours work for 8 hours pay, how long should you work? 8 hours. Now, if you're salaried, that means you work all the time. But if you're an hourly worker and you say, I'm hiring you to do this job over here, and it's going to be for 8 hours, you should pay a man for the 8 hours, and the man who works should do what? He should work 8 hours. And I've had people tell me, oh, it doesn't matter if I take off 30 minutes early or an hour early, and yet they get paid for it. What are they doing? Cheating. In essence, stealing. How does God feel about that? It's an abomination to him. He looks at things like that and says, I detest that. I loathe that. I don't like that. I want you to be honest in every facet of your business dealings. You tell people the truth, you tell them the whole truth, and you tell them nothing but the truth. And that's what he's trying to hit at here. And I can just tell you, Amos 8 verse 5, Micah 6 verse 11, and even 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 6 in the New Testament, God knows when people are cheating someone else. Okay, verse 2. When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. Now, I can't help but apply this to something that's going on this month. Y'all know what it is, don't you? Yeah. Everybody's advertising, show your pride, show your pride. And they're taking something that the Lord gave as a symbol of His consistent promises, the rainbow, and they're trying to make it into something perverse. I don't like the idea of pride, period. Well, that's self-respect. Yeah. But the idea of pride goes with the idea of arrogance. And with arrogance goes the idea, I'm not listening. I already know it all. He said, when pride comes, then comes shame. How many of you have ever been embarrassed publicly? I know I can raise one hand. I can raise all my hands and all my feet and all my toes and all my fingers. It's easy to be embarrassed publicly. And one thing is, if you'll sit back and not put yourself out there, you'll find out you won't get embarrassed as much. And what's taking place here is with pride then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. And there's so many of these. Chapter 3, verses 34 and 35, chapter 16, verses 18 and 19, chapter 15, verse 33, all of them talk about pride and arrogance. And pride is when a man thinks too much of himself. You know, in Romans chapter 12, verse 3, for I say to you, through the grace given to me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but think soberly, as God has dealt to each man a measure of faith. It's very easy for people to get this idea of pride, and when you have those who become proud, like Rehoboam, you remember Solomon's son? What was it that caused him to reject the advice of the elders? Pride. You remember what he was told by the elders was, be a servant to these people. Humble yourself. But rather than doing that, he said, you know what, my little finger is thicker than my father's thigh. You know, I'm stronger, more powerful than he. James 4, verse 6 and 10, where he talks about humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God that he may exalt you in due time. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 and 6. There's so many passages that talk about the importance of humility. A person actually putting the needs and the wishes and actually even the position of others ahead of themselves. Yeah. The reason why a person lifts himself up is because they believe that's where they belong. You remember Jesus talked about the Pharisees. They loved the chief seats at the feast and the greetings of men in the synagogues and in the streets. They called a man rabbi. Matthew chapter 23. Okay, let's go now to verse 3. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. Again, you'll notice there is the integrity of the upright, the perversity of the unfaithful. It's what guides them. A person is, I'm trying to think of the way to express it a little differently here. It's what provides a direction in your own life. The choices that you make. When you got up this morning, you had a choice where you wanted to go to, what you wanted to do. You could have gone and played golf. You could have gone fishing. You could have gone shopping. But you made a choice. Yeah, I think about these people who decide to stay up all hours of the night and go to the bar at 2 o'clock in the morning. Are you shocked that somebody got shot at a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning with a gun and alcohol in them? That doesn't surprise me at all. The likelihood of you getting hurt here this morning is very minimal. It's choices that you make. But the integrity of the upright is what guides them. It's what helps them make their decisions. But the perversity of the unfaithful, their wickedness, is what guides and directs them. Now, verses 4 through 8 is a section where Solomon's going to talk about some valuable things. Let's notice here. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. Now, I want to take verse 4 by itself for just a moment. Riches do not profit. Now, Solomon's not said that all the way through. In fact, he's talked about the riches of a rich man is his stronghold, it's his fortress, it's his tower. But he qualifies that by saying, in the day of wrath. There is a time when riches have absolutely no value. When is it that riches have no value? Judgment Day is definitely one of them. What's that? Death? I mean, if you've got the largest bank account in this congregation and the day you die, what difference does that make? Not a bit. That has no benefit to you. But he's also talking about in the day of wrath. And I'm thinking here, not just the wrath of God, but I'm thinking about the wrath of man. Let's say, for instance, here is a man who chooses to commit adultery with another man's wife. And here the man comes to confront the adulterer. And he says, I can't believe you did that. Well, here, let me pay you off. What does he say? I don't want your money. Your money doesn't mean anything to me. What matters a whole lot more to me is the integrity of my family. Well, they would have a right, but you got to understand, I think sometimes we look at it as if one person was able to go and take personal vengeance. It was actually brought to the elders of the city, and it was an action enacted by the city. The capital punishment included in the Old Testament was a judicial act of the nation of Israel. It wasn't just sort of like, okay, I don't like what you did, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. That, that just was not the way it was intended by the Old Testament. Well, he talks about righteousness delivers from death. You do what is right, you don't have to worry about the day of wrath. You don't have to worry about the day of judgment. That's where you will be delivered. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright. I think what Solomon is just trying to stress here is the choices you make. If you make righteous choices, you don't have to worry about the difficulties. You don't have to worry about the problems. Most of us, I'd say practically all of us, don't go to the bars at night. If you don't go to the bars at night, you don't have to worry about that, do you? I don't worry about it. I'm not worrying about some drunk coming out to my car and wanting to start a fight because I'm not going to be there. It's all about the choices that are made. But the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. Now let's take with it verses 6 and following here. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. When a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of the unjust perishes. Again, he's talking about the deliverance that they enjoy. He said he'll deliver them. But then the latter part of verse 6 is the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. Now, don't think of lust just in terms of physical, sexual things. Lust can be for a lot of things, can it not? You can lust for money, you can lust for power, you can lust for fame. The unfaithful will be caught by their lust. Everything that's just drawing them deeper and deeper into the sin. I think about James chapter 1. Jesus talks about, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, because God cannot be tempted by sin, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each man is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. And then he talks about that the lust gives birth to sin. Sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. If you don't stop that inordinate desire soon, it's going to lead to something that you don't want. And so when a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish. Everything that he's hoped for is gone. Now, what does a wicked man hope for? Money, power. What happens when he dies? I mean, there's nothing left for him, is there? There's several passages of Scripture I could go to point that out. But let me go ahead and take verse 8 before we run out of time here. He says, and the righteous is delivered from trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. The righteous is delivered from trouble. It comes to the wicked instead. And, there's so many passages. I think about what Elihu said. Now, Elihu was the young man at the end of the book of Job who looked at Job's life. And Job chapter 36, I'll read verses 18 and 19. He said, because there is wrath, beware lest he take you away with one blow. For a large ransom would not help you avoid it. Will your riches or your mighty forces keep you from distress? That question's being asked by Elihu to Job. How much money had Job had earlier in life? Very wealthy man. Greatest man of the East. But Elihu is saying, now Job, don't put too much confidence in that. Because when the day comes, Jesus would say in Matthew 16, verse 26, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what would a man give in exchange for his soul? And so the expectation of the righteous man is good. But the expectation of the wicked is not good, and he has nothing to look forward to. Verse 9. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. Let's talk about this guy here. What is a hypocrite? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. He condemns what he himself is practicing. Okay. The New Testament word describes a man who was an actor, like in a play. He puts on one face, but in reality, he's something else. Something else is different on the inside of him. With his mouth, he destroys his neighbor. Now, a hypocrite's a person who would come up and pat you on the back and say, oh, I'm your buddy and your friend. But what's he got in his hand? A knife, a dagger. He's stabbing you with it while he's patting you on the back. That's the hypocrite. He's making you think he's your friend, but in reality, he's trying to destroy you and destroy everything that you are for. He destroys his neighbor. He has no good intent in his heart. But through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. He knows about using his tongue. He's thought about what he's going to say. He's decided how he will respond and talk about and to others. And if you've got a problem with someone else, how should you resolve it? Talk to them. You remember what Jesus said, Matthew 18, verse 15. And if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault between you and the whole congregation. I don't think that's what he said, was it? Between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. You think that through. You don't have to talk about him. You don't have to talk about him. You talk to him and try to resolve it. And then, if he won't hear you, take with you everybody else. No. One or two witnesses. That at the mouth of two or three witnesses, every word may be established. And if he will not hear the church, that's when you get to the whole church being involved. But the wise man here is one through knowledge. The righteous will be delivered. The guy who's done the right thing, what about him? He doesn't have to worry. You're doing what's right. Someone makes a charge against you. That's one of the things that, as preachers, that's just a fact of life. People are going to say things about you, and you can't stop it. But what you can do is make sure that you're doing what's right. And then what does it matter? What does it matter if you're doing what's right? You know, if you're doing what's right, the other people are the ones who are going to have to suffer the consequences for what they're saying. If you're doing what's right and you keep doing what's right, yeah, there may be people who level charges against you, but you keep doing what's right, and then ultimately you're going to be the one who's going to stand up and be respected versus them. And so in all of this, it's all been about how a person acts, the way they speak, the way they talk, and the way they treat one another. Well, that's a good place for us to stop. Verses 10 and 11 are going to go together about the response to righteous rulers. But this is where we're going to pick up our study next week in Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 10.